So to start off, would you mind just introducing yourself?
Okay. Anything specific you want me to cover? Just
Whatever you feel.
okay. My name is Rosa Ramirez, and I'm the assistant director for diversity, inclusion, and community engagement. And I'm a Queens alum. I graduated in 21 with a bachelor's in psychology, and I'm currently a master's candidate for the MSTOD program here.
Are you from the Charlotte area?
No, I'm from Manhattan, New York, but I grew up in Durham, North Carolina.
Okay. Would you mind describing your experience during the last 2 years about the COVID pandemic?
Yeah. So I was a student at Queens when the pandemic started, and I got sent home, which was Durham. And so I lived at home for about a year, I guess, until I moved back to Charlotte. And I hadn't fully lived at home for a while before that. So a sense of loss of independence in a lot of ways. As much as my parents tried to treat me as an adult, it was weird for them having me back at home. So I think there was kind of a struggle for that. And then, of course, onset of loneliness, because I didn't really have any friends that were in the local area. We don't really have a lot of family in Durham besides my immediate family. So we weren't able to go. Most of my family lives in the Dominican Republic. We weren't able to go travel for a while. And also have a lot of elder family. So it was just kind of scary not knowing what was going to happen, stuff like that.
Would you say your relationship with your family changed during the pandemic?
Yes. I think in a lot of ways it did make our relationship stronger because we were forced to just find a lot of ways to engage with each other because we were all bored. We were all frustrated being stuck at home, but we started doing a lot more things as a family, like going on walks. My mom and I were cooking a lot, and so I think it just made more time for us to really actually spend time with each other rather than just kind of in passing. But there was also times where I think it put a lot of strain on our relationships. We obviously spent a lot of time together, and then I also kind of talked about that loss of independence. So just, going out and things of that nature, my parents were very much on the being super, super cautious, and being a 20-something, I wasn't as cautious as they were, and so there was always kind of a struggle for who was going to win that argument.
And with your extended family, how did you keep in contact with them, or did your relationship change with them?
We still kept in contact with my family. Most of my family's in the Dominican Republic, so typically it's pretty normal for us to just keep in contact by phone or WhatsApp and stuff like that. We were able, once travels and stuff was opened, we were able to actually travel a few more times during the pandemic because the prices were a lot cheaper. Although our travel was very different. In being a developed country, we were pretty much on lockdown 24/7 when we did go.
Would you mind going into a little bit more experience in your traveling to the Dominican Republic during that time?
Yeah. So the first time that we went to DR in the pandemic, they were still on full lockdown. So every day, weekdays, the city would shut down at 5. And if you didn't have a pass to be driving around, you would get pulled over. And if you didn't have any reason or they couldn't find any reason, they would arrest you right away. On the weekends, it was even more strict. So on the weekends, they would close the city on Saturdays, I think they closed it at 2, and on Sundays at 3 so that you could still go to church. And so it was really hard because, of course, when we go to DR, we stay with our my aunt and my grandma and stuff, so we were able to be with them all the time. But the rest of our family, we weren't able to see them as much as usual because on the weekends would be the time we would go see them, and you would have to basically plan it out. So you go travel to somebody's house at like 9 a.m. and leave by 12 because there's going to be traffic since everybody's trying to get home before the lockdown starts. It was also just very it was just very eerie. Like, it never really got to that point in the U.S. Like, you know, even when we had lockdowns, they were very like kind of loose, and you could still go to the grocery store. In DR, they weren't playing games. Of course, they couldn't really afford to because their medical systems aren't built in the same way ours were. But most of my cousins are surgeons or doctors in DR, so they were constantly working. We would never see them. They were always in the hospital, and they would kind of like talk us through what it was like, that they had beds like in the parking lot. They took the parking lot out completely, and so they had to put beds in the parking lot, and that was like their reception area, because their like original reception area was completely overtaken as like an emergency room essentially.
Wow. So for your own like personal routine back home, like here, how would you say things changed for you?
I found a lot more hobbies during the pandemic. Of course, when class was in session, like when we were still in school, I was, you know, trying to do that as regularly as I could, like going to a desk and trying to sit down and do class and do my homework. And so that part was a little weird, but then I had a lot of free time on my hands, because normally when I was a student here, I'd be going to a club meeting, or I'd go to work, or go to something for my sorority, and I didn't have any of those things. So I think I started crocheting during haven't done it since, but I started crocheting. I started learning sign language, trying to find really random things that I could spend my time doing. I was doing a lot more exercise. I was cooking a lot more because I wanted to like be entertained. And since we couldn't go out to eat, I wanted to make sure my meals were like really, really good. So yeah, that's kind of what I changed my routine to be.
So was your last year like all online for you?
My senior year?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, pretty much. So first semester was all online. Second semester was, I think, when they started to sort of lift things. So there was like 1 or 2 of my classes that would have a hybrid option, like once a week. And then I don't think my sorority would do things off and on, but they could never be on campus, I believe. So there was a couple times, but I moved off campus that year. So I really didn't come on campus much at all that entire year.
And what are some of the challenges you faced during the pandemic?
The main challenge I think that I faced was mental health. I've always struggled with anxiety and depression, but being in a place where I couldn't like see people, I'm a very big extrovert, so I really struggled not being able to, you know, have in-person interactions with people constantly. And also, you know, when you're sitting at home with not a lot of things to do, that's when kind of thoughts kind of overtake your mind and stuff. So I did really struggle with that. Also wasn't able to I had therapy online, but I didn't feel like I was as beneficial. So that kind of changed how I felt on that aspect, with anxiety kind of going up and stuff of that nature. And I think as well, another challenge that I faced was trying to be intentional about keeping relationships, because I've never been really a fan of you know, FaceTime and that type of things. I'd rather just wait to see somebody in person. And so I had to really be extremely intentional about trying to reach out to people. And so I struggled a lot with maintaining, especially my relationships here on campus or in Charlotte, maintaining those as strong as they were before the pandemic.
And do you think you succeeded in doing so?
I think to a certain extent, I think it also helped me kind of realize like what people were worth the time putting in the effort, and which people were maybe just not, didn't do the same for me. And so, my friends that we were consistent about reaching out to each other and seeing each other when we could, felt like those relationships got stronger. And then the ones that not so much, kind of just faded away.
And going back to the mental health aspect, I see on your hand it says mental health advocate.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think, or how did COVID, I know you mentioned the mental health struggles, but how do you think COVID affected you becoming a mental health advocate? Or was that something you were like before?
Yeah, I think I've always been a mental health advocate because I've faced struggles myself in that aspect. I would say that it probably did make me more active in that. I think I became more of an activist in general during the pandemic. That was one of the ways that my family and I kind of bonded, was going to protest, not necessarily specifically about mental health, but there was obviously a lot of other social justice issues going on at the same time. And mental health, specifically in communities of color, has always been a passion of mine. And I think that was even more exacerbated during the pandemic, because families were not only experiencing the regular day-to-day where they already may have a mental health disability of some nature, but then they were also in situations where they may have lost work, they may have, been stuck at home with an abuser or an unhealthy relationship. They may have been in more of a financial struggle than they were before. And so in my community, at least, I saw that kind of come to the forefront in a lot of ways, in the people that I interact with on a daily basis, and kind of seeing them not really taking care of themselves because they were really just trying to survive at that point. And so for my family, there was a lot of things that kind of became natural for us during the pandemic to kind of try and not only like make purpose for ourselves during that time, but also to help those around us. So my dad is a pastor in Durham, and we have always had a food bank, but before the pandemic, typically we served about 60 to 80 families a week. It was in person. They would come pick out their food. During the pandemic, we started a drive-through food bank, and we went from serving 60 families to 500 families every week. So that's, I don't even know, I didn't mention this earlier, but that's really what I did almost every week. Tuesdays and Wednesdays, I spent all day at church. Our whole family did, with several other church members, and we would pack the lunches, then we would load them up on, or not lunches, we would pack meals and like non-perishables for the whole week, as much as we could give. The government started kind of funding us as well. Mostly at first, it was just neighbors and other churches donating. So that became a big part of our just daily routine. And then we also, especially my mom and I, started going, since we had a lot more time on our hands, we were going to a lot more protests, doing a lot more advocacy work on the social justice side of things. There was a lot of protests in the Durham area for like Black Lives Matter. And so we got pretty involved with the NAACP and a couple other organizations in our area. And those were kind of ways that we tried to combat not only what we were facing, but what we were seeing around us every day too.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think your family is still as involved as you were during the pandemic, or how has that changed for you?
Yeah, yes and no. So in terms of the food bank, yes, my parents still do that every week. I try to help whenever I am in town. And I try to do stuff kind of here with my church in Charlotte. And in terms of the social justice, I think in general that has just kind of faded after the pandemic, because people weren't seeing it on their TV every single day, and it wasn't it isn't scaring them as much as it was when the pandemic started. And that's where I think that like original drive came from. And that's kind of what made that movement so strong in the beginning. Now it's like, we're back to day-to-day lives, so it's not as important to everyone. So as much as I would like to still be as involved as I was in the activism side, there's not as many outlets for that as there were then. Of course, like, with the overturn of Roe v. Wade and stuff, there was kind of some more movement in trying to get involved. And so now I try to volunteer at an abortion clinic as much as I can, and other different organizations of that aspect. But I think there was a lot more outlets for that during the pandemic.
And kind of wrapping up, what do you think you learned from the pandemic? Like in terms of advocacy, family?
Yeah, I think the biggest piece that I took away from the pandemic was the importance of community. And I think what kind of kept me going, regardless of whatever I was struggling with mental health wise, was that so many people who, going to the food bank every day and seeing so many people who had nothing to do with our church, nothing to do with the people who needed the food, coming every single week, making it a routine, and they still go all the time. And then also being able to see families who, once they no longer need the help, now they come and help other families. I was really able to just kind of see the importance in having a strong community and being able to help each other out. And I think that the pandemic made that so much more obvious on how much it really takes a village for everyone to be okay, for everyone to survive something as intense as that was. And that community can be small. It can be just, your immediate family taking care of each other, but it can also be your entire identity group, your church community, your school. And I saw how a lot of those communities really were able to come together in a lot of great ways. Yeah.
And one more question. Personally, what do you think your future will look like?
Related to that,
yeah.
I think that the pandemic gave me a lot of drive and also kind of gave me pause on figuring out what I wanted to do long term. And in the time that I was able to really have that advocacy and start to really become the activist that I'd like to be long term, I was able to really figure out that I want that to be part of my life in more than just like a weekend thing. And that's also kind of where I figured out my purpose in finding this job as well. Kind of gives me the space to do that on a daily basis. And then also like the master's program that I decided to take on has a DEI concentration, and it's all about working with people. And so I think that it really helps shape and kind of it helped me reconfigure what it meant to be successful. Because I would say prior to that, my focus, I was obviously coming up on graduation, but my focus was really finding something that would keep me sustained financially, and not really finding something that was meeting my needs on a more long-term and like about my purpose and my overall goals as a person. And so that kind of reframed what was going to be the next steps going forward. And I'm pleased to say that I think it really helped me find an amazing job and kind of figure out what's going to be next long term as well.
Awesome. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah.